He has served on the SOCAN board, the SAC board, CARAS, Songwriters Hall of Fame, and currently, Eddie is co-chair of Music Creators North America, representative for North America on the International CM Exco, and most recently, chair of Fair Trade Music International. In 2012, Eddie was recognized for his work and was appointed a member of the Order of Canada. Eddie has been invited to speak about fair trade music at many worldwide events, including WIPO and the United Nations. I am delighted to present Mr. Eddie Schwartz.
Well, thank you very much, Isabel. It's obviously a pleasure and an honor to be here today. And hello to everybody out there who's watching this live webcast, and to all the folks here at SOCAN's offices in Toronto who are here to learn a little more about fair trade music. So I'm going to go through a presentation that I've done, which will give you some overview on fair trade music, what fair trade music is all about, what our objectives are, what our purpose is, and also I'm including in it a brief history of fair trade music so you can understand the steps that we have taken to get to what today is truly a global initiative. Fair trade music is supported by over 500,000 music creators on 5 continents. So I think it might be interesting for everyone to get a little information about how that came to be. So what is fair trade music? What is the underlying purpose of fair trade music? So fair trade music is a fair trade music is a creator-led initiative. So it is primarily the backbone of the idea of fair trade music is music creators around the world. This is not coming from lawyers, it's not coming necessarily from people who work at multinational media companies. This is a group of songwriters and composers and artists around the world who have come together to build fair trade music. That said, very important for me to point out that we do this in collaboration with our friends and colleagues who are in record labels, who are music publishers, who do have other roles in the music business. So although it is driven by music creators, other people in the music value chain, other actors are very much involved and have had a lot of influence and input into fair trade music and what we're doing. So its purpose is to inform music consumers and creators who in the value chain operates in an ethical and sustainable way. And I think that most of you who are trying to make a living in the music business might agree that finding those people who are truly there to help music creators in a very difficult economic environment is a difficult thing to find. It's also very difficult for consumers to know. There's a lot of back and forth about who actually is properly compensating and remunerating those of us who make music for a living. And so it's very hard to know who the good guys are from the bad guys in the music industry. And as I said, that's true both for creators and for consumers. So much like fair trade coffee and other agricultural products, the idea behind fair trade music is that we let consumers and creators know who the good guys are. So a large part of what fair trade music is trying to do is to come up with certification standards for various actors in the music value chain. For example, labels. We can certify labels. Are they acting in a way that's fair and sustainable? And I'll get into how we define fair and sustainable a little later in the presentation. So the idea being, again, just like coffee, is it will give people an informed choice. Who are the good guys and who may not be the good guys? And so every consumer and creator, in fact, can vote with their economic impact, who they do business with, to support those businesses that in fact are operating in an ethical and sustainable way within the music business. So I think it's very important that we point out, and I touched upon it earlier, but I'll say it again now, that we advocate for a fair music chain from creator to consumer and everyone in between. So although largely this is being driven, at least in these early days, by those of us who create music for a living, it's very important to us that this is a sustainable, or that in the 21st century, we have a sustainable music ecosystem for everybody in the value chain, for the record company, for the music publisher, as well as for the music creators, artists, songwriters, composers. So this is all inclusive. It's not just about one particular segment, one particular self-interested group. It's about a sustainable, ethical, and transparent value chain for everybody. So I mentioned earlier that I'm going to give you a little idea of how this idea came about. So let's go ahead and do that now. And as you see, all the early slides to date, or I should say so far in the presentation, have been centered in Canada. And that's because that's really where this idea came from. In 2007, a young law student at the University of Ottawa by the name of Safwan Javed, who happens to be a director of SOCAN now, the Canadian Performing Rights Society that most of you are familiar with, and is also a director of the Songwriters Association of Canada, wrote a paper on fair trade music. He was a young drummer, I believe, and law student at the same time. And when he wasn't on the road, he was going to law school. And he wrote a paper on fair trade music, which was co-authored by one of his professors there, a gentleman by the name of Jeremy De Beer. So they came up with this idea of fair trade music. It was a brief paper. Many of the ideas weren't really fully explored, but at least it formed some of the philosophical basis for fair trade music that we have today. In 2010, Safwan joined the board of the Songwriters Association of Canada, and he introduced this idea to us, and we kicked it around for a little bit. And the Songwriters Association of Canada, based here in Toronto, but with activities all across Canada, adopted fair trade music and started to try to develop the idea, where could we take this, fill in as many of the blanks as possible, and that's work that still continues to this day. Around 2 years after we adopted it, a new organization came to be in North America called Music Creators North America. And around the periphery of this slide, you can see some of the organizations that are currently members of Music Creators North America. And in fact, it basically is almost all, there's one that is not, but it's almost all of the major music creator, songwriter, and composer organizations in North America. So at the top right there, you'll see the Society of Composers and Lyricists, which is based in Los Angeles, mostly film and TV composers. Underneath that, the Songwriters Guild of America, which is the largest songwriter, certainly the oldest and one of the largest, if not the largest songwriter organization in the United States, based in New York and Nashville. Then, of course, at the bottom right is the SAC, our Canadian organization. At the on the other side of the slide, we have the Council of Music Creators, which is based in New York. And we have the Screen Composers Guild of Canada, which again is media composers here in Canada. And at the bottom, we have an LA songwriter organization called SONA, and it's the Los Angeles branch. They only really have a branch in Los Angeles now, but they're a very vital and growing organization. So all of these organizations are now part of Music Creators North America, an umbrella group for all these organizations. And in 2012, at meetings in New York, Music Creators North America adopted fair trade music as well as one of its key strategy and policy initiatives. So, Music Creators North America was approached shortly thereafter by an organization called the International Council of Authors of Music, CAM. And CAM is at that point was not quite global, but certainly very quickly growing into a truly global organization. It was an umbrella group for similar organizations to MCNA. MCNA is based in North America. CAM is an umbrella group for similar organizations and for the creators on the boards of performing rights societies around the world. And it's based in Paris. And it's affiliated with CZAC with a C, which is the umbrella group for all the collective management organizations around the world. Once MCNA had formed, we were eligible to become part of the International Council of Authors of Music. And we attended our first meeting in Costa Rica in 2012, shortly after we formed, and presented fair trade music to this international group based in Paris. And lo and behold, they also very much liked what we were talking about and officially adopted it as one of their global initiatives. And I'm happy to say that now 4 or 5 years later, it is actually their #1 global initiative, fair trade music. So just to give you an idea of which continents we're talking about, the European Composers and Songwriters Alliance, which is obviously based in Europe, the Pan-African group, which is called PAXA, and the Latin and South American group, which is called ALCAM. And to bring you right up to date, late last year, the Asia Pacific Alliance was formed, and we met in Beijing. So literally now it is truly a global initiative that represents those 5 continents. I think it's important to note that that's the first time in history that we've had a global alliance of music creators around the world working on the same initiatives. And, we're very excited about that fact. So the next year we met in Nashville, and we continued to work on fair trade music and fill in some of the further details on certification and how we would move forward. And that brings us to the study concerning fair compensation for music creators in the digital age. Now, one of the first things that we realized as we were working through the issues of how do you develop a fair trade music initiative is, what do you mean by the word fair? I mean, fair is something that means something different to everybody. And certainly if you were to talk to people in the coffee value chain or in any economic value chain, what is really fair to everyone, I think would be somewhat in dispute, because everyone has their own self-interest at heart. So we felt it was very, very important that we give this question to somebody who was an expert. And in fact, we found an economist by the name of Pierre Lalonde, who worked here in Canada, worked for the Canadian government in the Heritage Ministry, and then went on to work at the Copyright Board of Canada for many years. So he was thoroughly knowledgeable about all of the issues from all of the players in the music value chain. Because as those of us in Canada, many of us know, the Copyright Board of Canada adjudicates those issues where you have the different players in the value chain trying to figure out, and of course, to some extent arguing about what is fair, what should radio stations play, what should record labels play for certain kind of royalties, mechanical royalties, what should they pay to the publishers. So there's all the different parties in the value chain come before the Copyright Board of Canada on a regular basis. So again, since Monsieur Lalonde was there, he was very aware of these conversations and was very knowledgeable about how to deal with them. So we gave this question to him: give us some idea of what you think is fair. And he came up with this study concerning fair compensation for music creators in the digital age. I will not go through the findings now. It's, I don't know what, 35 pages. There is an executive summary, but the website at the bottom, fairtrademusicinternational.org, for those of you who do want to look at the executive summary or read the full study, I encourage you to go to the website. There's lots of information about fair trade music there, and you will find the full study and the executive summary, so you can get a good idea of what Monsieur Lalonde came up with in terms of an answer to the question, what is fair in the music value chain? So I'm now going to go through some of the other accomplishments that we've had since it was adopted. Fair trade music was adopted in Costa Rica in 2014. One of the important things is we've established a not-for-profit to start certifying fair trade music, and it's called Fair Trade Music International. And we have an international board of music creators and an advisory board, which includes publishers, record labels, etc., that is now meeting on a semi-regular basis to work through all of the practical issues that face us in developing fair trade music. And I'll get to some of those in a little more detail shortly. We have created an international council and an ambassadors program. So again, if you're working on 5 continents, you need to have people on the ground all over the world. And so we now have some folks, we have some folks in Europe, we have some folks in the Spanish-speaking world in Madrid and South America, and we're growing those programs so that we have people in various regions of the world who can talk about fair trade music in the native language of that region to people in those parts of the world. In 2015, we started our first certification of individual releases. We looked at all of the different players in the music value chain, and we faced the challenge of realizing that no one certification. If you're just certifying coffee, it's a pretty simple, relatively simple, I would think, operation. And by the way, we have been in touch with people who certified coffee, to the fair trade agricultural folks, to get some idea of how they do these things. In the music business, it's much more complicated. We have many different players. There are many different kinds of value chains. There's independents, there's multinationals. Again, it's a much more complicated process. So we thought, let's start with individual releases. So not even labels, but just individual release. Does an individual release from a certain label qualify for a set of criteria that are fair, transparent, and sustainable? And again, those criteria are available also at fairtrademusicinternational.org. So you can have a look at those and see the criteria we came up with in consultation with various other parties in the music business. So we were able to certify last year our first international release, which was Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros. It's a picture of the band. And we began to get applications from around the world from other individual releases to also certify them as fair trade music compatible. Late last year, CISAC started a fund for contributions for fair trade music, so that there's an arm's length organization that is collecting money for us, where there's a bank account there where anyone who wants to contribute to fair trade music can put money in that bank account, and CISAC is administering it for us. Again, that is in Paris. I think it's very important to note that a number of the world's best, most prominent performing rights societies have endorsed fair trade music, either in principle or to one degree or another. And I'm very, of course, proud that both of these North American performing rights societies have done so. SOCAN, of course, and we're sitting in SOCAN offices in Toronto, so thank you, SOCAN, have endorsed fair trade music, and as has ASCAP in the United States, one of our sister organizations in the US. And I have to also give credit to the very first performing rights society which endorsed fair trade music, which was the Irish Society, IMRO. They've been very generous in their support. So last year, we also launched a new website. Again, I'll give it to you one more time, fairtrademusicinternational.org. I encourage everyone who's interested in this and would like to help support it to go to the website and see what new information we have there. We're updating it on a regular basis, and there's a lot of the detail that I'm not gonna be able to get to today is available on the website. Also, we are working with one of the world's foremost branding and communication companies, DDB, to put together a fundraising and outreach program, branding program. And that is in fact, later today, I'll be going to a recording studio where we're recording our first satirical song. I won't give away too much about this branding campaign. Hopefully, you'll be seeing it very closely at a social media site dear to you. It is kind of a spoof. It's a little Spinal Tap-like, and talks about some of the inequalities in the music value chain that we're dealing with today, I think in a very creative and hopefully entertaining way. So we're working with them, and as I said, I imagine within weeks, we'll be able to launch our DDB funding and communication campaign. So that gives you a quick overview that brings you more or less up to date. And I think it's really important to emphasize that no one's ever tried to do this before. First of all, organize music creators on a global basis, just no small task, that's new. And also to develop, let's call them best practices or standards for a fair, transparent, sustainable music value chain, which I think we all know in the digital world in particular has been extremely challenging. And also is a new endeavor that's never been tried before. So we are certainly in uncharted waters to some extent. We believe in what we're doing and are moving forward, but I think having come this far, we are taking a moment and have taken some time in recent weeks to kind of look back at what we've learned so far and how best to proceed in building fair trade music. So first, let me say there's some enormously good news about fair trade music. And that is what we have discovered is that this feeling, this yearning, if you will, for an equitable, transparent, and sustainable music ecosystem is not just limited to those of us working directly on the project, because we have had inquiries for certification from people from Indonesia to Berlin, from Madrid to California, and most everywhere in between. Last week we got inquiries for how a small record label and individual releases could get fair trade certification from Scandinavia. So again, we've had no promotional budget. This is simply from our website and from some social media. We have gotten requests for certification from folks from all of those places I mentioned. So there's a lot of people out there who understand that we're at a place now that is not good for music creators in the digital space in particular, and that fair trade music is an idea that has merit in helping us move towards a music value chain that is sustainable for not only for music creators, but for everybody in the music value chain. So some of the things that we've come up with in taking a moment to review where we've come so far. And as I said before, we have an ambassador program for people all over the world. But I think we're starting to understand we're going to need to go one step farther and actually develop regional hubs for fair trade music, because I don't even know, frankly, I'm ashamed to say, but I'm not even sure what language the company that in Indonesia that approached us speaks. So we have, when you're doing something in a global order, you have language problems, you have culture problems. Business is done differently in different territories around the world. So we need to establish regional hubs where people can certify on a more local basis. To that end, I'm very happy to announce, by the way, that there is office space now reserved for us in a building which has many different music companies in it in Madrid to start to certify the Spanish-speaking and Portuguese-speaking world. So I think that's very exciting. I was actually in Madrid a few weeks ago, and they showed me the space that will become the Fair Trade Music Office in Madrid. That will probably become the first regional hub for fair trade music. And thank you to our Spanish friends for working so hard to set that up. So we need resources, and we need to do planning to move forward, as I've said. And the truth of the matter is that the key word there to some extent is resources. Right now, everybody who works on this, and from its inception, everyone who's worked on fair trade music is a volunteer. None of us are getting paid. We're doing this all because we believe in the idea of fair trade music and are doing what we can to move it forward. But, and for example, DDB, one of the world's foremost branding and communications companies, is very expensive. If you walked in off the street and wanted to use their services, it would cost you tens of thousands of dollars. They're doing it entirely pro bono. So they're giving their services to us free. We're now looking at some legal issues in terms of how we form our legal entities around the world. One of the law firms, another law firm is doing that for us pro bono. But the truth of the matter is you can only go so far without any money, without any resources. So that is an important issue that we're facing now. How do we raise money? Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, CZAC has a bank account that they're administrating on our behalf. How do we get people to put some money in that bank account so we can sit down with experts at planning, with people who do that every day, do business plans, help, consultants who can help us build fair trade music to scale it up where we think it needs to go so that it will be effective as a global music creator initiative. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but some of the other things that we've learned. We spent a lot of time talking in particular to Spotify and Pandora and to another streaming service, actually 2 streaming services in California that are starting up and 1 in Berlin. And this was very educational. We learned a lot. One of the things we learned is that there are many different models here. There are many different technologies, many different ways that they hope to sustain themselves financially. So again, without resources to develop certification models for all these different kinds of business models in the streaming world, we're going to have a problem. Pandora's model is very different than Spotify's. Apple's is very different from both of them. So again, our conversations with these three companies, particularly Pandora and Spotify, went quite a ways down the road. We were very, very encouraged by how open they were and how they understand that it's in their best interest ultimately to be seen as the good guys, not the bad guys. They certainly get that. That doesn't mean we don't have a long way to go in further conversations. And we've taken a pause in our conversations for a number of reasons, as both they regrouped for a number of issues they have, and for us, for the growing pains, if you will, that we're going through. But we plan very shortly to come back to them and continue the conversations with them. Hopefully with a little, their situations may be a little better, might be a little more, the timing might be better for us to talk to Pandora and Spotify. And the same is true on our side. I think we'll be a little bit better prepared to have conversations with them and have some of our ideas a little more developed. So how do we build support? How do we get the resources we need to move fair trade music forward? And as I mentioned, we already have the DDB campaign coming up. So, excuse me. One of the things we started to do, and I encourage everybody who's watching this and anybody who does watch this, and those of you who are in the room, we are selling t-shirts, and we think they're very attractive. So if you like this idea of fair trade music and you want to help support us, what are they, $30 includes shipping, something like that, I believe. Yeah. It's a heck of a value. Every penny that we earn goes to support fair trade music. And again, you can order your t-shirt at fairtrademusicinternational.org. It comes in one color. You're looking at it. At any rate, I have one, and I paid for it, so I hope you'll do the same. We are going to be delving into the crowdfunding world, and we've had some research done pro bono by a very helpful young gentleman who pointed us in the direction of specific crowdfunding sites that can be helpful to us. So that is another area that we're going to be, hopefully you'll be hearing from us shortly. And if you can find it in your heart to come to the crowdfunding site of our choice, we're still coming down to a final decision, and we will launch it in conjunction with the DDB campaign. So all these things help support each other. But if you do find it in your heart to help us, we hope you'll go to the site that we've decided to use and help fair trade music by making a contribution. And number one, you see I've done this kind of in reverse order, 3, 2, 1, is we are in discussions with collective management societies around the world on also helping put some money into the CZAC administered account on behalf of fair trade music. And I think I want to say a few words about the history of collective management, because I think it's very important for us to remind ourselves that collective management for 160 years now has been fundamental to the sustenance of individual music creators. In fact, I think you could argue that collective management, our PROs around the world, are the most robust and successful business model in the history of the music business. Been around a long time, and I think as a lifelong songwriter myself, I can say that without collective management organizations, there was no way I could have made a living. So I think that it only makes sense, given that the collective management organizations out there help fair trade music. I think that we know they're the good guys. Those of us who write music know that collective management are the good guys. I'm not saying they're perfect. Every organization, you know, there is no such thing as perfection in the music business or anywhere else. But certainly this admirable tradition of supporting the creation of music, I think fair trade music dovetails perfectly with that essential purpose of our collective management organizations around the world. So we are in discussions with them to help us through Fair Trade Music, to reaffirm that commitment to a fair and sustainable music ecosystem. And I think the other advantage to Fair Trade Music that is very, very helpful to all parties that are on the right side of this equation, and in particular our collective management organizations, is that Fair Trade Music doesn't talk about copyright. It doesn't talk about arcane laws and regulations. Very often when we talk about copyright, we talk about the issues that face music creation in the 21st century. We get into very arcane conversations about licensing and regulations and different parts of the Copyright Act. Fair Trade Music talks about these same issues, but does it in a way that everyone can understand. Again, just like fair trade coffee. You don't have to know anything about the coffee business other than here's a certified fair trade music bag of coffee, and here's one that's not certified. That's all you have to know. And now as a consumer, you're invited to make the right decision. Do you want to support the farmers? Do you want to support a system that is sustainable to the people who actually create the coffee? Or do you want to buy the other bag of coffee where we know that's probably not the case? So fair trade music, in other words, brings all of that complexity down to a very simple decision that a consumer or a creator can make. Make the right choice, make the ethical choice, or be the last link in an exploitive value chain probably that doesn't fairly compensate all of the players in the value chain. We think that's a very powerful message that fair trade music conveys. And it's not only to consumers and creators around the world, but it's to our own, within the collective management movement, PRO movement, we communicate to our own members and affiliates that way. Many of whom, I mean, I know many songwriters who really don't have any understanding of how they make a living. They're quite happy to get paid, but that doesn't mean they actually understand how that check arrives at their door. They don't understand the struggles that we are engaged in all the time to make sure that those checks continue to go and that music is a sustainable way of making a living. So again, fair trade music is not only an external tool to communicate to the wider world about what we do in a way that everyone can understand, it's a tool for us to communicate internally to our own members and affiliates of how, of the problems that we have and how we're trying to deal with them. So I'm going to start summing up here, and forgive me for speaking as long as I have. It is a complicated global situation, so, but just bear with me a few more minutes here. We're almost at the end. So fair trade music offers a vision for a reimagined music landscape for the 21st century, a vision that can capture hearts and minds. And again, the wonderful news that we have so far is that we've seen that happen around the world with the people who have heard about fair trade music and come to us for certification. And we believe our collective management organizations have the practical experience and technology to realize that vision. In fact, I would go farther than that and say that they're already helping tremendously to realize that vision. Let me add that in recent weeks, the Japanese Society, JAZRAC, and the Polish Society, whose name I'm afraid I don't recall at the moment. Sorry, speak a little louder. How's it pronounced? Zakes, okay. I think you're right, that's right. That rings a bell. Have both made contributions to the Fair Trade Music Fund. So thank you to JAZRAC and Zakes. We appreciate your support. And so those of us who are building fair trade music look forward to working with all who want a fair music ecosystem for the 21st century. Around the slide are some of the other organizations I mentioned around the world. ALCAM is our sister organization, Music Creators North America and Latin and South America. PAXA at the top is the Pan-African organization. Music Creators North America I've discussed. X is our European counterparts. CM is obviously the umbrella group based in Europe. And I didn't have the logo for the newly formed Asia Pacific group, but they also now have joined us. So thank you to all of the music creators, over 500,000 music creators around the world who are now supporting fair trade music. Thank you very much. And please, again, for further information, please do go to fairtrademusicinternational.org. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Eddie. Really appreciate you coming here and giving us this update. I've got a few questions from our chat room that I want to just work with, unless there's somebody here in the room that wants to ask something first. Okay, okay, so bearing in mind that this is an interesting concept in terms of compensation and fair remuneration to all those in the music value chain, there's a really interesting question here about the fact that, okay, it is a technologically neutral solution and would apply to the current platforms, any kind of payment related delivery. But many years of music offered free to consumers is almost impossible to fix. Is that correct? What's your feeling on that?
Yeah, well, thank you. That's a very good question. That's one that I think we get often. And it's certainly, the environment has been made much more challenging by the fact that the value of music is considered to be very low through file sharing, of course. So we've gone through, I guess, almost 15 years or more now, where file sharing and the free sharing of music has put a serious dent in the value of music. So how do we climb out of that hole? Well, I think again, some of us feel that we can and we need to. So to the question, we now have legal services that are growing rapidly. Spotify, I think, is growing exponentially. Apple, their streaming services is growing exponentially. You've got tens of millions of people who now have, because it's just as convenient, have left, have been moved into what are legal services that do pay something. Now, so I think that's an encouraging sign. The problem there is that they don't pay very much. So how do we address that issue? How do we get more money coming to music? Well, I think the first place you have to look is you have to realize that there is a tremendous amount of money being generated every single day of the year, every week of the year, every year, by music in the internet. So we're faced with another problem, and that is not that music doesn't create any wealth or that no money is generated. It's just that virtually none of that money ends up back in the hands of the people who actually make the music. So there's a bit of a false notion that music has no value. Quite the opposite. Music has tremendous value. The problem is that value is being extracted before it gets to the music creators. And I think that's one of the big challenges we've realized in the last few years that we have to deal with. Now, there's good news on that front too. And this is where having a global organization, global music creators working together around the world is very helpful. In Europe, for right now, the European Union, they just came up with a directive on this very issue. And the term that's being used to describe this extraction of value there is value gap. Same thing. And one of the things that's causing it is called safe harbor. And what it means is that many of the players who are extracting value are protected from any kind of litigation or to be held accountable for extracting the value from the music business and from all creative content, not just music, but from all creative content, because laws were put in place in the early days of the internet that gave them a free pass, gave them a get out of jail free card, because they argued, well, we have no control over we're just dumb pipes. We have no control over what people do or what kind of information or what kind of content is transmitted by our pipes. So people are understanding now that those dumb pipes are not so dumb, and they are extracting a tremendous amount of the wealth we're talking about that music and other creative content generates. So yes, it's not going to be easy, but it is something we're addressing. We are working with our European counterparts to help strengthen the argument in Europe. It's now starting in the US. For example, the Copyright Office of the United States just asked for submissions on safe harbor. We wrote them Music Creators North America did a long submission on why safe harbor is a problem for us. So we are beginning to address it. We're working globally to do that. And I have hope that we can start to move that value equation in the right direction. And of course, fair trade music is another tool we have to help show people that the value situation, much like with agricultural products like coffee, has to be corrected so it's sustainable for everybody. And that feeds into the safe harbor argument as well. It's really all part of the same conversation.
So ultimately, do you think that the goal would be to see that fair trade music certification mark next to everything that's happening on the internet?
Yes.
We've got another question, and actually I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there that would be thinking about this. One of our people on the webinar wants to know if we have reached out to other organizations like AFM to support us in this initiative, or is there a reason that you've been keeping it creator-based at this point?
Great question. We have had some conversations with the AFM. The AFM have a similar kind of fair trade initiative based on the West Coast, I think out of Seattle and Portland. And we had conversations with them early on, and that's for young musicians in bars. They're trying to take sort of the fair trade principle and bring it to folks who are playing in bars out there. And we've had conversations with them. We're doing something a little different. So in fact, they kind of are complementary. Yes, so we have had those conversations. I spoke with, is it Ray Hare? I think it's Mr. Hare, who is the president of the AFM in the United States. I've spoken to Willard, who's the what's Willard's last name? I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank. He's Alan Willard, I'm sorry. Alan Willard, who is the, sorry, Alan, who is the head of the AFM, or it's not the AFM anymore, but the Musicians Union here in Canada. So we're having those conversations, and they're very supportive. I think they understand the value of what we're doing for all parties.
Quite a number of the questions actually have been answered by those, by your explanations. I guess one of the things that I think this audience, especially if they haven't had a chance to look at the study in detail or even the executive summary,
yeah,
would probably, and haven't followed the history behind the movement and everything else, maybe you could speak to what the low point has been for songwriters' compensation and how it became such an important timeline to start something like fair trade music.
I mean, what was the impetus that got us moving down this road?
Exactly.
Well, okay. I mean, some of you may have seen another presentation that I made where I had a platinum record from earlier on in my career that I was fortunate enough to receive, and talked a little bit about how much earning one of those would have paid me as a songwriter. So everything I'm about to say is based on my own, you know, the revenue that I've been fortunate enough to receive over the course of my career when I've had some success. So, you know, back up until, let's say, the mid 90s, if I wrote a song that ended up on a record that sold a million copies, which would have been a platinum record in the United States, for example, I would have earned about $45,000 in mechanical royalties. So roughly 9 cents goes to the songwriter and publisher, composer and publisher. Half of that, 4.5 cents, a million, about $45,000. So, you know, $45,000 is, I'd say, you know, kind of a reasonable middle class living. Now, the next year I might have another platinum record. The chances are I wouldn't. So, you know, at any rate, but at least it was an amount that was sustainable. I could dedicate my life to writing songs and making music. My current statements from streaming services, when I get 1 million streams, my per stream rate, and again, this comes from my own statements, this is not theoretical, this is taking what my music publisher sends me, doing some simple arithmetic to figure out what the numbers look like. So per stream from a major streaming service that we all know, I get 0, 0, 0, 0, 4 zeros after the decimal, 3, 5. So when you multiply that by $1 million, you get $35. So the point of the exercise was I had a picture of a platinum record, and then I had a picture of a pizza, both round, $45,000 on the record side, down to $35, basically a deluxe pizza, extra large with a couple of toppings. So that's as close to 100% drop in revenue as you can get, basically. So hence the birth of fair trade music. I mean, fair trade music came out of, as I mentioned, a long history, a lot of discussions. How can we talk about this to people, and how can we move this forward without getting into all of the arcane legal concepts and controversies involved with copyright, and find a way to talk about these issues in ways that everybody can understand. You know, and let me finish up by saying, I think this is very much of the zeitgeist of our time. You know, we've had some political upheavals in recent days based on, I think what everyone is beginning to realize is the erosion of the middle class in Western democracies. We talk about Brexit, we talk about the new president of the United States, and the fact that a lot of people feel left behind by our new increasingly digital and global economy. And they've turned to what you might call extreme political entities and individuals because they think there's some hope there. I think this is very much part of that larger narrative. What I made was a decent middle class living doing, I loved what I did, but I was able to make a decent middle class living. Most of the people in the music business made a decent middle class living. We weren't rich, we weren't rock stars, but we made a living and we could do what we had to do that. And I do think we made a contribution to the world in terms of the songs and the music that we created. That is going away. That is going away, and many people realize it. So until we get fair value for those of us who want nothing more than middle class living, to be able to sustain ourselves making music, doing whatever we do, until we put some kind of a limit on that enormous extraction of value. So fair value goes to a much broader cross-section of the population, and we have a, if you will, digital middle class in the 21st century. I think that's very important to our society, very important to our democracies, and I think fair trade music, and maybe eventually fair trade for all creative content. Think about newspapers, think about books. This extraction of value that's going to the so-called dumb pipe is affecting all kinds of creative content that has the potential to create millions of jobs, millions of middle-class jobs. If 7 or 8 people in the world have more wealth than half of the human population, I don't think we're ever going to get to that middle class. So I think those of us in the music business who are working with fair trade music represent a kind of movement that I think has to, and hopefully will spread beyond just music to other forms of creative content in the 21st century.
Well, Eddie, we really appreciate you coming by and spending this time with us. I'm sure that other people have more questions, and I encourage you to go to fairtrademusicinternational.org and send us your comments via email, or maybe add them to a trail on Facebook, and we'd be glad to get to them as soon as we can, bearing in mind that our administrative capabilities aren't up to international par yet. But I'm glad to see that everything's moving forward, Eddie, and that you're getting a lot of traction. And it really is an answer for all of the international issues surrounding compensation. So I encourage you to speak to your friends, and I look forward to our next event.
And buy a t-shirt.
And buy a t-shirt. Buy a t-shirt. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.